In the previous videos, we used LinkChecker to gather a dataset of all the broken links at cnet.com. We then took that dataset and loaded it into R, and we basically just kind of um, browsed around and got a feeling for what the dataset looks like, the column names, what's in the columns, etc. In this particular video, we'll kind of dig deeper and see if we can't get some more meaningful information out of this data set, something more actionable, right, about where the broken links are. Is there any patterns and what to do about them? So as we browse through again, remember the thing we're looking for is broken links. The interesting thing is obviously this result column, right? It has a 404 not found, 404 not found being specifically a very common instance of a broken link, right? If we scroll through it, we see a lot of them. If this were a really large data set, we wouldn't be able to browse through all of it, right? We kind of get tired looking at it. So we only have a 212 in this case, but let's pretend this is a larger data set, and we'll take the links data frame and we'll pipe it into the count function. This pipe operator basically takes the data frame and pushes it into the count function. This pipe operator is part of the package that we previously installed and loaded called mgritter. Inside the count function, what we want to count is we want to count the occurrences of the result column. So basically what this will do is it will form like kind of buckets, right, for each of the different categories of results. So 404 not found or whatever else we find. And it will give us how frequently they occur. So let's give it a try. Let's select that line, hit Control Enter to execute it, and in the console we see down here that 404 not found and 500 internal server error are two of the categories of results that occur in this dataset, in those 212 records, those 212 rows. 404 not found occurs 211 times, and 500 internal server error occurs just once. And if we had browsed through the entire dataset, we probably would have seen that at some point. Let's see if we can find it, and there it is, and there it is, right? If this were like a million record data set, you know, it'd be a little bit more difficult. If we had more categories, it'd be harder to get a sense of what the result column looked like, which makes this particular technique useful. So we see that 404 not found is a pretty common one. Let's filter specifically for it. So here we go. We take the links data frame, we'll pipe it to the filter function, and we'll filter specifically for a result equal to, and in this case we want 404 not found. So let's pop that in there, and we're going to store it into let's call it, let's say error.404, right? Because that's what we're storing. And we execute that command, and up here in the corner we see in our environment variables there's that error.404 variable with 211 observations, which makes perfect sense. It's one less than 212, which is the 500 internal server error. So let's take a quick look at it once again, and just casually looking across the data set. The first thing I notice is URL name tends to repeat a lot, right? It has this manifest.json and thing in it. So let's use the same exact technique and see if we can't discern any sort of pattern besides what we can do just by glancing at it. So again, we take error.404. We'll pipe it into count. This time we're not counting result, we're counting URL name. So let's count URL name. What do we see? We see that there are these one-off occurrences, right, of this wearable tech products other. There's this high-res audio one, and then there's manifest.json. Manifest.json occurs 209 times in this 404 dataset. Well, that's pretty interesting, right? So let's dig further into manifest.json. Right, we'll take the error.404 data frame, pipe it again into the filter command. This time we filter for the URL name is equal to that manifest.json. can see here we're just kind of going step by step, and we kind of discover things along the way. So we filter it, and we'll store it into a variable called manifest.json. Run that command, and we see here that has 209 observations, which is consistent with what we saw down here, right? Manifest.json has 209 occurrences. Let's click on the data frame again, and we look at it in the grid form. URL name all should be manifest.json. Parent name, that's somewhat interesting. We see some differences, some different data values here. Obviously, these will be all 404s. We look over here, URL, there are different URLs. This is cnet.com to manifest.json. Nothing too interesting in these columns. So, I mean, I would take a look at the URL column, right? Let's see how, if it kind of tends to occur on a specific URL, or is it all different URLs? So let's take again the manifest.json data frame. We'll pipe it into, again, that count operator. This time we're counting not URL names, but we're counting URLs. So let's count that for you there. And we see a bunch of ones. However, we do see these ... things down here, which means that there's more to this data than just these 10 rows, right? So the way that we can take a look at all of the data is to pipe it into view. Now this view is basically the same grid that we saw before, except that we're using our code to invoke the grid. If I hit Control Enter now, we can see this grid. This grid has some ones. There's one that has a 10. This is cnet.com, the Spanish site. And there's a bunch of different, it's not just single off occurrences, right? There's some that repeat twice, some that repeat 3 times, and so forth. It'd be a little bit more helpful if we could sort this. So let's go back to our code. In count, we can pass in sort equals true. Run that line again, and now it's sorted with the most recent, the most heavily occurring manifest.json occurrence on the top, and we see a bunch of 3s, 2s, and a bunch of 1s. So there's a lot of variability, right? So again, what we've done is with the data set loaded into R, we've now taken a look at it and gotten a feel for where the problems are, right? We saw that there are a bunch of 404s. That was in the initial data set. We filtered for specifically for 404s, and we saw that, hey, in this 404 data set, there's a bunch of manifest.jsons, right? We filtered specifically for manifest.json, and then we saw that the URL column, there's a bunch of different URLs. We did some frequency analysis, and we saw that yes, there are some URLs that tend to occur more than others, but it's generally kind of widespread, right? There's about 100 and looks like 156 different URLs that have this particular problem. So that's basically identifying the problem. In the next video, we'll look at what we do now that we know that there is a potential problem with manifest.json.